Before we continue analyzing the actual events of Garland's story Under the Lion's Paw, I'd like to look at the box or the column at the bottom of page 401 and at the bottom of page 407, where our book goes into what naturalism is. Naturalism in this case has nothing to do with being a forest ranger enjoying national parks or whatever. It's literary naturalism, which comes from philosophical naturalism. What does that mean? Well, when they say in the book emphasizes a detached scientific and photographic accuracy, I would say that's a little closer to realism, especially the French sort of realism like Flaubert and Zola, but those authors were certainly naturalists as well. Zola would write about how he was trying to be like a scientist. It didn't really work. He said he would set his characters going like an experiment and see what they would do. Of course, because he was an author and creating what they did, that didn't make any sense, but the point was that he felt the characters, once created, had what was called a milieu, which is the background they had, where and when they lived, what kind of upbringing they'd had, whether they were rich or poor, and that this would determine the way they behaved. So more than scientific, this was really deterministic, and it was also, as our book says, evolutionary. Much closer to the right idea is the sentence a couple later, man is viewed as a being with no free will, and then this is the real key, a creature determined by his heredity and environment. Man is just another animal, a human being, and this of course is very similar to what Marx believed. A human being is determined by what kind of upbringing he had, what social class he or she came from, what was the belief and morality system of that social class, and so on. Morals are not given to us by God. Morals are something we merely inherit and learn, and vary with whether we are in the upper classes or the lower classes, etc. Even the title of the story, let alone the events, the way Jim Butler treats Haskins, and of course the way Butler is only stopped by a murderous physical threat from Haskins. All of this is Spencer's, remember it was Herbert Spencer, not Charles Darwin, who said this, survival of the fittest world, which in what's called social Darwinism was applied by many people to the real life lived by humans. The strong defeat the weak. That's the way it should be. Well, what happens with the weak? Well, of course, the Haskins in this story, the whole Haskins family, are presented as being in that group. They were made homeless by losing their farm to the grasshoppers, which a naturalist idea would probably fail to notice could be called an act of God. And it says in section 3, when Haskins worked so hard, there's a great description of how they worked all day, just fell into bed. The boy, like, as I said, Garland as a youth, worked and worked himself. Why did they keep doing it? They kept doing it because they did not want to be homeless again. Bottom of page 405. There is no despair so deep as the despair of a homeless man or woman. And here's the key point that our book focuses on. That sentence ends, these are the hungers and rebellions that drive men to crime and women to shame. In other words, men to commit robbery or perhaps even murder, women to become prostitutes. Is this true or not? Well, our book says it isn't. It says, what is wrong with this kind of thinking? Like the man I wrote my dissertation on, Frank Norris, he set out to be a naturalist, but he couldn't really do it. Because to a man who does believe something about morality, about the world as it really is, the world God made, naturalism doesn't work, and I think there are actual details in Garland's story that show that. But I'll leave that to you to answer. The reason the exact point about homelessness doesn't work is because although there are people who say that poverty leads people to commit crimes, the mere facts of life show that's wrong. There are many, many honest poor people who never commit crimes. There are many rich people who commit crimes just because they find it exciting and they want to do things that hurt others. It's like the argument that poverty causes terrorism. There are millions of poor people in the Middle East who are not terrorists, yet Osama bin Laden was a billionaire. In this story itself, we see Jim Butler as the person who behaves immorally, and as I've already discussed, the councils as the ones that behave like Christians. And we see this in section 2. If you look at the beginning of part 2, at the very end of 402, it uses the phrase land poor. What does that mean? It means that Butler is poor if land doesn't count as wealth. Of course it does. Traditionally in the feudal system, land was wealth. And even in this case, of course, Butler could make a lot of money off mortgages, off rents that people paid. It says he started in a grocery business and then he just became more and more successful. All the money he got, he would put into land. Importantly, in the left column on page 403, he's described as someone who never forecloses. That means he doesn't say, if you can't pay the mortgage, get off. You're losing your farm, as happened all the time in the book, The Grapes of Wrath, for example. That makes him seem like a good man, but it's not good. Butler was astute. He said, I don't want your land, I want the interest on my money. He says, I can't have the land laying vacant. Butler realizes that if he kicks a tenant off the land, then there are no crops, no money is made, he is receiving no rent or no interest if it's a mortgage, but if he lets the tenant stay on, he keeps making money. So Butler seems like a moral man, but really he just wants to make as much money as possible. Council, however, just sees how kind Butler apparently is to his tenants. He knows there's a farm available that Butler owns, and so he feels he is helping Haskins by introducing him to Butler. So they talk to each other, they make a deal, and on the next page, Council again shows what a kind man he is. He's going to lend Haskins seed. Later on, he says he's going to give them 4 of his cows. It doesn't help him in any way. He doesn't have the motivation Butler does. He's not going to earn money off of this. So why does he do it? Perhaps the most important line in the story, to my mind, comes 2 paragraphs from the bottom of page 404, left column. When I see a man down and things all on top of him, I just like to kick him off and help him up. That's the kind of religion I got, and it's about the only kind. When Council speaks of religion, he doesn't mention the Bible, he doesn't mention Jesus, he doesn't quote from the Bible, and yet he says exactly what Jesus says. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. When I see a man down, I help him. Love your neighbor. The story of the Good Samaritan. Perhaps Garland thought he was being a good, cold naturalist, not presenting these evident biblical ideas. Perhaps he thought it would be too obvious, or he would seem to be preaching if he brought them up. But this just does not fit with the survival of the fittest idea. This is religion. Religion not in the sense of dogma, of rules, but of what it really is meant to be. As A.W. Tozer said, God judges by why we do the things we do, not what those things are. Council does it because he feels it's right, and because he feels people should help each other. So, of course, when he says, that's the only kind of religion, he's right in his way. Section 3 of the story, which I have already briefly referred to in this video, is the one that describes how very hard the family works until, and especially in, harvest time. Yes, there's negativity in that section, But there's also happiness. On page 405, have you seen the wheat today, Nettie? Ain't it grand? Just look at it. It was grand, says the man who grew up as a farm boy and must have also enjoyed seeing not just the wheat as something he and his family could make a living off of, but just the beauty, the size, the grandeur of a whole field of wheat. The harvest came, bounteous, glorious, the next column says. And then the most interesting sentence, I think, oh, how they toiled in those glorious days. Is that just a paradox? How could it be both? I think seeing it as a paradox is based on the wrong idea that Adam was cursed with having to work. Adam always was going to work, but God put him in the garden to work. He was cursed with it becoming difficult, with there being thorns and thistles and all of the things that make life harder for farmers even today. And we certainly see that in Garland as well. But work is not a curse. It's not a punishment. Even when it's extremely hard, work, because it makes someone feel that they're successful, they're helping themselves, helping their families, whether it's the man or the woman or even the children who are helping, that they're independent, that there's an achievement that they can look at and feel good about. Work is actually a very pleasurable thing. It's the lack of work, and which Haskins had when he lost his last farm, which is the real pain. And as Garland says, it was the fear of that coming again that led Haskins to be so desperate, to work so hard, and to be so desperate in that last section, section 4, the heart of the story, where the lion's paw comes down on him. The last section of Under the Lion's Paw is certainly the most memorable. It is a masterpiece in setting up a terrible situation that Garland's character can't get out of any more than a rat can get out of a maze he's trying to run through and can't find the way out of. It's on page 406. 3 years have passed. Haskins has spent hundreds of dollars. He's worked and worked. We know how hard he's worked. He's making a mistake, but he doesn't realize it by naming the amounts of money to Butler. This costs $300. That costs $200. Butler's saying, yeah, good job. What Butler's thinking is, if this guy wants to buy the farm, I'm going to tell him it's worth a lot more than it used to be. And that's exactly what happens. What did you expect to pay? Haskins gives him a figure, and then he gives one that's double. And then Butler says the thing that's so clever. Of course it's worth twice as much. All these things you told me about. The improvements, the work you've put into it. But that was my work, Haskins said. That was my money spent on the farm. Yeah, Butler says, but it's my farm. Mr. Haskins, you can say I will accept the price, or you can say I will not, and either keep paying rent or leave. It's a cold world, and the message seems to be what Butler says right at the top of 407. Never trust anybody, my friend. Is that really what life is all about? Well, we know it isn't, because Garland shows it differently with the counsels and with the way Haskins himself works so hard for his wife and children. Yes, there are people like Butler in the world. Fortunately, the world keeps going and is not an utterly wicked place, because there are people like Counsel and like Haskins as well. Driven to absolute extremities, Haskins creates a scene which critics have sometimes criticized. They think it's too melodramatic. One felt it was especially melodramatic, that seeing the child made Haskins stop. I actually think it's spot on. Haskins is unable to do anything now, backed into a corner as he is, but pick up a pitchfork, a good symbol there, because of course it represents his work as a farmer, and threaten to kill Butler with it. And then in what I actually think is a great scene, one of Haskins' children, a 2-year-old, runs across the path, and he doesn't do it. Why doesn't he do it? Well, there's a more practical way we can look at this. It makes him think, what will happen to my children if I go to jail or am even hung for murder? Who will look after them? And then there's a more emotional thing. Seeing that sweet, innocent child, use the word innocent despite the doctrine of original sin right now, and that it's his child whom he loves, makes him think softer, gentler things, and makes him not the killer that he might otherwise have been. The last line of the story is a great one. The words are exactly right. Make out your deed in mortgage. In other words, I give in, I will pay it. And get off in my land, and don't you never cross my line again. He's giving in to Butler, but he's saying at the same time, okay, but this is now my land. And that's, of course, at the center of human life. What you work for is yours. There are systems like communism that deny that and therefore are never successful. But in the system in our country, what you work for, however hard it may be, and however unfair the system sometimes is to people, as in this story, what you work for is yours. That's the motivation, that and family and love, which are so clearly represented in this story as well, and including in this last scene, as I've pointed out. That is the motivation that will keep you going. Not naturalistic motivations, but motivations based on the loving people that God made us to be. Garland really knew this, and that's why his later writing was not pessimistic and naturalistic. That's one of the reasons, in addition to the experiences he had in his life, and the talent which led him to put those experiences into words for readers so well. Those are all among the reasons that Hamlin Garland is, I think, one of the greatest Midwestern writers, and why a book like Main Traveled Roads is still worth reading.